The RSC meeting was last held on March 18th, 2021. The primary goal of the meeting, I'm not going to read these slides verbatim. You don't need me. If everybody wants to do that, you can just go ahead and put your computer on mute and read the slides as they come up on screen. If you don't want to hear me, I'll do my best to summarize and fill in what I think is more relevant information here, but I appreciate the effort in having these slides put together as I did request them. The main purpose of the meeting of the committee at this point was to discuss a couple different approaches to considering redevelopment of an RSA program. This work has been ongoing for well over a year at this point. The intention was to conduct a workshop last year. Unfortunately, with the impacts of COVID, we were unable to do that. The Research Steering Committee had met during the course of the year last year to consider whether or not they wanted to go ahead with doing the virtual format of the workshop. At the time, they decided that was not desirable. We've come a long way since then in terms of our ability to conduct virtual meetings, the comfortability both of staff, managers, and the public in doing so. So we thought it was prudent to reconsider that idea, not knowing exactly where we were going to be with things and wanting to keep this move forward. So at the meeting, we had a couple different approaches that were brought forward. The status quo approach of having only an in-person workshop, and then we had discussion about a hybrid approach, which would allow for multiple meetings to be held virtually with those on a topic-by-topic basis, and then a more in-depth in-person workshop to be held to summarize everything, hopefully later in the year. So that was the options that were before us. Next slide, please. One of the other elements that was extremely relevant to the work the committee is doing in the workshop is the inclusion of the SSC's Economic Working Group. We had good participation at our committee meeting from members of that working group. They are working on supplementing the information we have with economic analysis and studies. It's important to note that the working group is not driving the workshop. It is the committee that's driving it, but we as the committee see our ability to work with the working group and the SSC is very important. We look forward to the analyses that they can provide. One of the major discussion points about what approach to go with was, would we be asking too much of the SSC's Economic Working Group, forcing them to provide deliverables at a level that wasn't going to let them provide them at a level of completeness we've come to expect and appreciate from them. I think we were able to come to some consensus in talking through things at the committee level and afterwards, that there was the opportunity here not to treat this as a one-and-done product from the Economic Working Group, but rather to see this as an iterative process. One advantage of getting workshops going sooner versus later would be for the Economic Working Group to provide the information and thoughts that they had developed so far, start to run that by the public and management, get some feedback, create a loop in leading them to a final product later in the year. So we saw some benefit of that. Again, the goal would be that these final reports would be submitted to stakeholders that participate in the workshop. Next slide, please. So the outcome of the committee meeting was to prefer option 2, which was a workshop consisting of 3 webinars and an in-person meeting. These would be held throughout the late spring, summer, fall, again with a culmination of a final workshop later in the fall with the goal of presenting that to the full council later in the year. Next slide, please. Here's a summary of those next steps and proposed date timelines. I don't think we require any formal action by the full council today. Matt and I, Michelle Duval is vice chair, any members of the SSC that are on would be prepared to answer any questions that the full council might have. I think what we are looking for is just a nod of approval from the full council. Again, it doesn't need to be in a motion format, but if anyone has any concerns about this revised way forward, we do believe that holding these webinars, we think that we've made enough progress in the virtual world. We think breaking these down on a topic-by-topic basis will make this manageable. Again, we think this provides an advantage of an iterative process with the working group, again, with the eye towards getting back together for an in-person synthesis before the end of the year to make sure that we've got all our I's dotted and T's crossed. So that's my report. I'll turn to staff if they have anything else they'd like to add, and then I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, for any other feedback or questions from the full council.
Okay, I appreciate that, Adam. Thank you for the report. Let me ask staff if anybody has anything they want to add before I go to questions.
Thanks for that presentation, Adam. This is Matt. I think you covered everything very well, and I'm just looking forward to setting up this workshop and working with the committee. So thanks.
All right, thanks, Matt. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to this as well. Let me pull up my list here and see, does anyone from the council have any questions they want to ask of Adam or Matt at this time? Mike Pentney, go ahead, Mike.
Well, it's not a question, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay.
That's fine. A question or comment.
Okay.
We'll just take this as a discussion. That's fine.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Adam, and appreciate the work that's been done thus far and the work that's planned. And I really look forward to getting some background there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm going to go on mute. It might have been me that had a little background. I'll
okay.
Go on mute.
Yeah, so I appreciate the work that's been done, and the plan looks good for you know, for this summer and into the fall, and certainly look forward to the reports from the SSC work groups and the RSC, and I really hope that we can find a path forward for you know, for moving research set aside back on the council's plate, and get a good program you know, developed. I do just want to caution, you know, that given that a lot of people that are coming into this are fairly new and may not have been directly involved in the you know, the previous research set aside program of the Mid-Atlantic Council, that whether we like it or not, there are, you know, a number of legal constraints and frameworks that we have to operate within in terms of grants and how we operate as an agency and interact with the council on this. And so I just hope that people you know, understand those and are keeping those in mind as you know, as they work through these issues. I certainly you know, hope that we can be creative and look at develop some new options. But there is this underpinning of, you know, legal requirements and framework that we have to operate within, and I'd hate to get down at the end of the road and you know, have a recommendation that is simply unworkable because you know, because of those constraints. So again, appreciate the work. Look forward to the final results, but just a note of caution. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Let me see if I see any other hands. I don't have anybody on my list at this point. I will go to, let me go to Emerson Hasbrook as a member of the public and a commissioner with the ASMFC. Go ahead, Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. And Adam, I just wanted to thank you as chair of the committee, and I wanted to thank the entire research steering committee for developing this plan. So I want to thank the SSC Economic Working Group and their participation as well. And I look forward to the 3 meetings that are coming up and the workshop. And I think the path that the committee has put forward is a good path to explore what we can do with RSA. And in terms of some of what Mike was saying, I've been around since the beginning of RSA, so hopefully I can add some perspective on that as well. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Emerson. And I know that this has been something that's been on your plan and interest for you for quite some time. So, you know, in looking at the next steps here, I'm looking forward to also engaging and working with those involved, with the committee and the public on these meetings. So let me bring up my list again. Hold on one second. Adam, I see your hand up. Did you want to respond before I ask if there's any objection to the next steps?
Great, thanks very much. So just going back to Mr. Petney's comments, in the meeting materials for today's meeting is the summary from the last committee meeting. Included on that list towards the bottom of page 2 is a list of proposed participants. We have listed here NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement, as well as a placeholder for GARFO. Does Mr. Petney believe that identifying those 2 roles meets the legal needs, or do we need to define something further, a John Almeida role or something along the lines that is more substantive than just OLE and GARFO?
Mike, did you want to respond to that, Mike?
I believe, you know, a placeholder for NOAA Office of Law Enforcement is certainly a good idea, particularly on the enforcement aspect, you know, meeting 3, that subgroup. But I think, you know, in addition to GARFO staff, primarily Ryan Silva, our research steering coordinator, who's been very involved in the research set-aside program for a number of years, and understands a lot of the limitations and constraints on operating a grant program. Probably having somebody from NOAA General Counsel as well could help, not just on the grant framework legal constraints, but also on the enforcement side as well. So I just suggest maybe a couple of additions there.
Nope, that's helpful. And Matt, I think we just want to note inclusion of general counsel specifically is probably worthwhile on our list moving forward. So I appreciate that feedback very much. And I will acknowledge Ryan's role so far. I know he's been very involved with Matt already. Some data queries have been submitted. So that is in progress. And again, thanks for your support in that role.
Okay, thanks for that, Mike and Adam. So let me ask, Adam, you mentioned that there's it's not necessary to have a motion, but I'm going to ask if there's any objection to the plan as presented under next steps. If I don't see any hands, then we will consider that the plan forward. I don't see any hands, so we'll consider that the plan forward. Was there anyone from the public that wanted to? I already called on Emerson, but let me give others an opportunity to ask any questions of Adam or Matt or Mike. I don't see any hands coming up on my screen. So Adam, thank you very much for your report, and I look forward to working with you and members of the committee and others on making progress with this plan. So thank you very much for your report, Adam. Were we able to get Paul back online?
Paul is having internet difficulties. I believe he's on the phone, but we still need to find his slides. So maybe what would be best.
Brandon actually just sent them to me. So just if you give me 1 second, I'll pull them up.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. So, and Paul, can you hear us?
Paul, you need to hit *6 to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we can hear you now, Paul.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for the deference here, consideration. My internet hookup has an anxiety meter on it, and it seems to go out at the most inopportune time. So I apologize for that.
I'm sure you've probably been listening to this meetings for the last a couple days, and now all of a sudden, when you need to report out, it fails on you. So that's just the way things work.
Yeah, absolutely. There was absolutely no problems before this. So thanks, and appreciate it. What I'd like to report on is the results of the meeting of the Scientific and Statistical Committee on March 9th and 10th. I'll try to be brief. If you go to the second slide, please. Okay, I'm assuming you see the primary topics on your screen. Is that correct?
We can see it, Paul.
Okay,
yep.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, so we had, 4 primary topics which we addressed, and these included a review of the first research track assessment on index-based methods. The second was consideration of blue line tilefish, which we talked about yesterday. We examined under golden tilefish the 2020 survey results, and very impressed by those, and then reviewed with Sarah on the status of the ecosystem report. Now, of course, we've had a number of ecosystem related topics today, so what I'll try to focus on in this case are the aspects of that relevant to the SSC and decision making, and then we had a number of topics under other business. So the first topic, next slide please, is the index-based methods research track assessment. So this was the first of the topic-oriented research track assessments, and so it was a very impressive effort, and it was motivated by the fact that in many instances, or some instances, the assessment model was judged unacceptable for management, and in those instances, an alternative is oftentimes proposed, and this alternative is empirically based, so it is usually based on surveys or indices or trends in those parameters, and tries to discern or determine an appropriate direction for catch. The focus of this effort was on what might be called extreme retrospective patterns, as where there's instability in the predictive quality of the assessment and the terminal year, most notably and oftentimes resulting in a overly optimistic estimate of stock size and a overly and an underestimate of the actual magnitude of fishing mortality. This problem is probably more common in Northeast Council or the New England Council stocks, but for some stocks in the Mid-Atlantic, such as black sea bass, it is a problem. Now, this was a very large simulation study. There were 14 candidate models that were evaluated. There were 18 different scenarios under consideration, and for each one of those combinations of models and scenarios, 100 or 1,000 simulations were done. So there were about 250,000 simulations that were assembled. Now, this was a management strategy evaluation type process where you have an operating model that is generates a stock condition, a known stock condition, that is, the truth is known. You have an estimate of what you think is going on based on the model that's applied, and then you respond to that with a management or harvest control rule, which then guides the true state of nature and also the subsequent observations that you get. So it's a closed loop simulation and allows you to evaluate the performance of various models with respect to a known underlying true state of nature, that is, although be it simulated. They used 50 different metrics of performance, so they solicited a broad range of measures, ranging from sort of management measures as to whether you're overfishing or underfishing, whether the state of the stock is above or below biological reference points, but then also the consequences for catch streams in the future, the value of those streams, the variability of the potential catch and revenue streams from that. So each of these measures was evaluated under a full range of both scenarios and measures of performance, and all of the simulation results were saved so that they can subsequently be harvested, much like the oceanographers save model runs, or the climate modelers save model runs, which are then subsequently used for other investigations. There was a team of 11 investigators led by Dr. Chris Legault at the center, and they set a new record, I think, in terms of meetings. They had 41 almost consecutive weekly meetings. So whatever the metaphor is here, whether Chris was the Pied Piper or Tom Sawyer, he was able to manage a very complex, large distributed project in a COVID environment. So it's an impressive body of work and also a good model for these types of experiments. And I think many of the climate-related simulations and studies that have been suggested or proposed also would benefit from this kind of thing, and also would allow for a great degree of inclusiveness. Kind of a bottom line conclusion was that none of the individual-based models or index-based models perform better than the what I've called a retro-corrected age-structured model. By that I mean that you have an estimate of the retrospective pattern, you adjust your terminal year estimates of fishing mortality and biomass accordingly, and then act in terms of a management decision on that basis. So this was a very surprising conclusion, and it sort of says that even in instances where you may have an imperfect model, which has a lot of information, notably age structure in the model, that by a retreat to a simpler model that does not have the same underlying complexity, but yet also has no knowledge of the bias that might be occurring in the model, is probably a good way to go. That you may have to swallow hard and deal with the lack of fit in the age structured model, but it's probably better than a quick and easy alternative. That being said, there's obviously a lot more research that needs to be done, and the larger database on that can help sort of identify those factors that can be called causal factors in terms of varying model performance. The SSC had some concerns. The influence of varying survey catchability was not addressed in terms of a factor on this. As we've just seen in recent presentations by Vin Saba and Sarah, you know, there are changes in survey distribution. Those can, in fact, sometimes cause retrospective patterns. They were not able to. This was one of the factors that went on the cutting room floor in terms of, you know, those 250,000 simulations. What they did was look at changes in catch, that is missing catch, as a factor generating retrospective pattern. And the second factor was a change in underlying natural mortality. That is, if natural mortality is increasing, a larger fraction of the population is unobserved, that is through catch, so forth. We noted another factor of SSC concern was that growth rate changes and interactions with natural mortality can occur, as well as the form of the stock recruitment relationship and a number of other technical issues. These are pretty much to be expected when you have a bunch of highly skilled scientists reviewing another highly skilled scientific body piece of work products. We did inquire about the potential use of this model structure for evaluating missing data in 2020. This, of course, will come to the Council front and center in the August meeting. The management track assessments will occur in June. The SSC will evaluate them in July, and you'll look at them in August. So there are a number of technical issues and also likely almost guaranteed increases in the uncertainty associated with quotas that are the ABC determinations. Another factor was that most of the index-based methods do not allow estimation of biological reference points. So they provide a directional aspect in terms of catch adjustment, but they do not tell you where you are necessarily with respect to overfishing, nor do they tell you where you are with respect to stock status, that is not overfished or overfished conditions. In the 2021 management track updates, there is a retrospective pattern that's strong for the disaggregated black sea bass. It has a pattern where the northern stock overestimates the quantity, and the southern component has an underestimation of that same factor. So together they tend to offset each other, but it's not a perfect marriage there. So this may come up. Just in overall, there was we recognized this was very good work and high value study, and that this framework would be valuable for future work. So the next slide, please. So you see blue line tilefish, 1 of 2. This slide was reviewed by Matt Seeley yesterday, and I won't spend a great deal of time on it, other than the major conclusion was that there's no compelling evidence from either the data update or the reports from the advisory panel to change the current ABC. A lot of discussion yesterday centered on our lack of knowledge, our profound ignorance of the underlying basis for managing this stock, and that we hope that there is progress along the way. The SSC will be monitoring that future updates on the model, and as we learn more from the mandatory reporting of anglers and so forth, that there is some hope. And some of the information that Bonnie Brady mentioned, or Lori Nolan, mentioned yesterday, that about the utility of acquiring, information, biological samples from landings will be a key point. They are rare species, so it's important to rare species and landings relatively. So it's important to, when the samples come in, that you have an opportunity to look at them. So next slide, please. Okay, this is 2 of 2. This is just a quick tabular summary. You all decided on this yesterday. Just a qualification: when we certify best scientific information available, we recognize, of course, that this is not the final word, but the agency has that opportunity and responsibility to do that. But we're just simply noting this as an endorsement from at least one scientific body that we agreed that this was the best scientific information available. Next slide, please, is golden tilefish. Okay, we received a overview of upcoming events. There's a management track assessment in June of 2021 and the research track in 2024. We'll be reviewing the recommendations for 2022 in July, and we'll also be setting ABC recommendations for 2023 and 24 as well. So, but I wanted to focus most of my efforts, attention on the independent fishery independent longline survey conducted by fishermen, under the guidance of investigators at Stony Brook. And this study built on the 2017 survey, but it had a number of changes. These are refinements. They reduced the hook size from 2 rather than 3, so there's a 8.0 and a 12.0 hook rather than the larger size that was used in 2017. There was a smaller footprint of the survey. It focused more on golden tilefish, had slightly fewer stations, and there were two key aspects of the changes in that. One was that it monitored each hook status as it was recovered. So 14% of the hooks were returned with fish on them. 10% of them had bait, but interestingly and importantly, 76% of the hooks returned without bait on them. So they may have been stripped by invertebrates or small fish, but they were definitely without bait. Now, when you're using longline survey or any kind of fixed gear survey, one of the critical issues is that you're basing this on the volitional aspects of the animal, the fish. So in this case, they're hungry and they have to move in order to eat. So if there's no bait on the hook, they're not going to take it. So when you're going into the future and trying to determine changes in relative abundance, if your hook, baitless hook comes up in 90% next year, for example, or in some future survey, then that would alter your ability to interpret whether or not the target species of interest, in this case, golden tilefish, had actually changed in abundance. There's a lot of research work that'll be done on that. Another thing is that they did have current meters at each set. This is important in terms of how the bait plume disperses and may give some additional insight in terms of catchability. We noted that there are a number of pending analyses directed towards the assessment. One of them is the dome-shaped selectivity pattern that's observed in the fishery and used in the model. So that's an important area of research where this will have direct bearing. We're looking at the potential area of influence from the bait plume that may have some predictive value, and that might be combined with some other environmental factors. In terms of council information and long-term utility, it's probably worth noting at this point that fixed gear surveys may have some future value in terms of monitoring areas that may no longer in the future be amenable or samplable with mobile gear, such as areas where wind farms may preclude larger vessels and bottom trawls. So I think this is laying some very important groundwork for those kinds of factors. And then finally, we reviewed some preliminary results of some management strategy evaluation work by Dr. John Wiedemann. We noted that there should be some very important kinds of consequences of that information in the future. So next slide, please. State of the ecosystem. Is that what's on? Everybody's got that on the screen? Okay. You've heard presentations by Sarah yesterday. Request by Dr. Doremus for updated information, and an excellent presentation earlier today by Dr. Saba about the climate-related research. And so I, like the council and so forth, we noted the formatting improvements in the report, the inclusion of the performance metrics and a risk summary, as well as the sort of the graphical ecosystem theme based. We noted that 25 of the 33 concerns that were identified from the 2020 report had been addressed, and we also, appreciated the organization and clarity of the report, and then notably from the standpoint from the scientific community was the availability of the underlying data and the technical details on each of the data summaries. Graphical depictions have huge visual impact, but at the end of the day, you do need to look at the data and make evaluate the quantitative aspects of those numerical relationships and see how to best adjust them. One of the topics that came up earlier today, particularly in Vince's talk, was the importance of meshing of timescales for decisions. The SSC is acutely aware of the sort of the occasional mismatch between information that is indicative of a long-term but gradual trend versus the immediacy of making a decision about catch limits in 2023 and 24. So what we recommended as part of our deliberations was that it would be a good idea to have less emphasis on annual improvements and more of a focus on how to use them, so how to address that time and area meshing that is in some instances providing a limitation on the direct use of some of this information for management measures. So we proposed a subgroup to sort of operationalize the ecosystem metrics and particularly how they would fit into the SSC's overfishing limit coefficient of variation. That is the uncertainty metric that we use to apply how much risk is associated with a particular stock assessment and the measure of the overfishing limit. So that ultimately guides the SSC in terms of its determination. So we think that this kind of subgroup format might help enhance the ability for that transition of very good ecosystem information into operational things. The ILACS working group is, for example, which is also a research track assessment scheduled for this late this fall. It is, has a number of oceanographers associated with it, and here it provides a good instance of cases where the sharp spikes in the resource abundance, apparent resource abundance or availability can provide some guidance on where and when to look for a potential driving factor, whether it's a warm core ring or some other measure of frontal metrics. So I think there's a lot of promise, and we're overall the SSC was keen on pursuing this in 2020 through this year and into next. The next slide, please. Our final major topic of discussion was the economic working group case study. This is looking at the research set aside, specifically with a focus on the economic aspects of redevelopment. Obviously, we're not trying to get out ahead of any of the organizations and groups that are involved with this decision, but we are sort of looking at it from the standpoint of a value-added context, where from three different facets or perspectives here. How the candidate fisheries and research projects are to be funded, how to make that provide some economic relevance to that. A key point is the maximization of funds available for research, and a variety of mechanisms that might be used for that specific purpose. And then, importantly, ensuring that that enforcement and monitoring of quotas is sort of an integral part of the plan. So those are the kind of considerations that are underway. And of course, this obviously is working closely with council staff, the council itself, the center and GARFO, as well as the Office of Law Enforcement and fishermen to address this. And there is a workshop proposed. It is likely to be in the fall, and discussions are underway as to what the best way to do this, whether it's a one-shot deal in person, or whether it's multiple webinars, or some mixture of the two. Obviously, it's desirable to have in-person meetings, but if that comes at the expense of reduced participation, then it's not clear what has been gained. So those alternatives are being evaluated. And then finally, under other business, we discussed the council research priorities, which you just heard summaries about. But we hope that those research priorities, and we are taking steps with under leadership of Brandon to ensure that those are linked to SSC activities. And ensure that when the SSC makes recommendations, that they are based on the context of the council's research priorities. So again, closing the loop on that. They had a couple of little changes in terms of species and topics leads within the SSC, and I'll just refer you to the web page for those updates. And then finally, we talked about the National Scientific Coordination Subcommittee. That is commonly known as the National SSC meeting. It's a survey or a meeting of all the SSCs. It's held every other year. It was postponed in 2020 due to COVID. It will be web-based rather than the anticipated trip to Sitka, Alaska. But it will have some important relevance to the topics that have been discussed in the past 2 days. First, it will be a focus on the use of ecosystem indicators and assessments. There'll be some topics of interacting species and how they influence stock assessments and ABC determinations. And then finally, the influence of distributional changes. So our Northeast and Northeast U.S. and Mid-Atlantic will be a central part there, but I suspect that changes in Alaskan cod and pollock are also kind of big deals to be discussed. So that's all I have in terms of my presentation. If there are any questions people would like to ask, I certainly like to answer anything I might be able to. So thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And a lot of good information there. I'm going to go to the list. Let me pull it up 1 second. I see Dewey has his hand up. Dewey Hemmelwright, go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation, Paul. I was wondering if I could get or if we could have the golden tilefish survey results sent out. Is there a paper that's been done on that or a summary of it?
Yeah, as far as direct use of that, I would have to refer to the investigators. There is a report that summarizes a little bit of it on the Counsel website for the SSC, but we don't have the final report. As you might expect, there's a lot of future work to be done with respect to getting the checking for dome shape selectivity for one, processing the plume information, the currents, and so forth. But the raw data, the basic stuff, I think can be made available, and I would contact either Mike Frisk at Stony Brook or Jill Olin, who is now at Northern Michigan or Michigan Tech University, or Paul Nitschke at the center for that. So I'll see what I can do and see if there are any kinds of policy issues on that. But appreciate the interest.
All right, thanks, Dewey. Thanks, Paul. Is there anyone else from the council that has any questions for Paul at this time? Michelle Duval, go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the report, Dr. Rago. And I apologize if I missed this when you were talking about the state of the ecosystem report and, you know, your support of, you know, just trying to incorporate this information into the setting of ABCs. And you mentioned establishing a work group. Has a work group actually been established, or is that sort of a future task on the SSC's list? Thanks.
It is a future task on the SSC. We will be bringing this up at our next meeting in May, selecting candidates and also trying to develop a charge for that. We simply brought it up as a way of letting the council know that we think that this is an important factor, and that, you know, trying to work towards that operationalizing, if that's the appropriate word, the information is kind of what we see as an important next step in all of this. So yeah, I will have more details at the next council meeting.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Paul. I'll bring up my list again here. Anyone else from the council have any questions for Paul for his report? Anyone from the audience have anything they want to ask Paul? Okay, seeing none at this time. Paul, thank you very much for your report. A lot of good information, and we'll look forward to hearing about follow-ups at the next meeting. So thank you very much for your time this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, take care. Okay, we're going to move on. I heard somebody. Oh, Jim Fletcher, I see your hand go up. Did you have a question for Paul before we move on?
Yes, sir.
Yep, go ahead.
We keep building different models, and Nicole Kessler was an electrical engineer of great fame, and he made the statement that today's scientists substitute mathematics for experiments and wander from one experiment to another. My question is, why do we keep building models? When I started at 90, it was a cage and catch at age model. And I have all the respect in the world for Dr. Rago. But I'd like to run that same model he just predicted and say that we have 100 chickens and we get 25 eggs a day, and see if he can tell me anything about the population of males to females or anything else. These models do not work. And I have always argued that the science is not correct, and I am not picking on Dr. Rago. I have all the respect in the world, but when I keep seeing another model come up that the results have come up that we are importing 92 to 93% of the seafood this country consumes. With the second largest EEZ in the world, we have a problem. Management has a problem. The Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management has a problem. And until we address the problems, we're not going to get anywhere. I got frustrated yesterday when they talked about ocean acidification and never mentioned man-made chemicals going into it. But that's my rant for the day, and I will get off. But I would like to know why we keep changing models. That's my question. Why do we keep changing models? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, James. That you always kind of get to the core of the issues, and I think in this case, it is a kind of a deep philosophical basis, you know, and I agree with our ability to interpret the world it does rely on data. It must be grounded in empiricism and experiments. Yet at the same time, you need to interpret them in terms of underlying models. And so, you know, there was a famous quote by a physicist named Eddington, who was in England. He was like the equivalent, or close to the equivalent of Einstein. But he said that we're all aware that we don't trust our models unless they're confirmed by data. But he said at the same time, it's equally true that we need to don't trust our data until they're confirmed by models. So, you know, the way you look at the world is ultimately governed by how you think it works, and how you collect information has consequences for its subsequent use. I suspect that we could get into a longer term philosophical issue in this case, but I think to your question, we develop alternative models because one, we find that when confronted with data, those models oftentimes are insufficient for their intended purpose and need to be modified. Sometimes there have been a lot of computational advances that have occurred, particularly in the last 20 years, which allow for more complicated models which could not even be contemplated earlier times to be developed. And the joint effect of those is that these models evolve. Hopefully, they can incorporate many of the factors, or more of the factors that you've highlighted there. That you do need to ground these in real data. Yet at the same time, you need to interpret those data in terms of the general theory of the observations. So I'm sure I probably haven't answered all of your questions, but I hope that these reflections are at least relevant to the topic. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the question, Jim, and thanks for the response, Paul. We need to move on. I appreciate your report, and I don't see, let me look and see if I see any other hands. I don't see any hands at this time. So, Paul, thank you again for your report, and we're going to move on to the Executive Director's report. We have Dr. Chris Moore, who has a number of items under his tab. So, Chris, whenever you're ready to get started, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, everyone. There are a few items behind tab 9 I want to bring your attention to. Mary's going to help us scroll through the material so we can keep track. If you take a look at the first document behind the tab after the memo, it's our typical council meeting topic update. So this is what we have planned for 2021 based on our decisions last year on our implementation plan. Note what we're doing in June. We have a council meeting scheduled for June 8th through 10th. One of the things that we're going to be doing at that meeting, we'll talk about it in a little bit, is advisory panel appointment recommendations. That's going to be done through the executive committee in closed session. This is our 3-year appointment process. And again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Also be talking about one of the big items for the meeting is going to be the Bluefish Allocation and Rebuilding Amendment. We expect joint action with the Bluefish Board and final action on that particular amendment at that meeting in June. Also looking at squid, surf clam, ocean quahog, and we get another update on our habitat activities. You can take a look at what we have planned for the rest of the year, August, October, December. Those are all still in-person meetings. Another way to look at the council meeting topics is to take a look at the next document, which is the 2021 council meetings topics at a glance. If I had looked at this yesterday and taken my own advice, I would have seen that in fact what we're planning to do for tilefish. One of the questions I asked Matt yesterday was on when we were going to get this report for the private recreational tilefish permit. And that again is going to happen in October. So I should take my own advice. This is an important document for folks to look at if they're trying to track the particular issues related to any of the species or topics that we're involved with in terms of management. If I could, Mr. Chairman, just to indulge, if you could indulge me just for 1 second before we move to the next topic. One of the things that we're struggling with is what we plan to do for the rest of the year. So we have an in-person meeting scheduled for June. And at our last meeting, we talked about the possibility of making that a hybrid meeting. Certainly, we also, and I think based on the comments that we got in April, we talked about making all the meetings post-June hybrid as well. And certainly that's something we can do. But I just want to gauge the interest of folks in terms of that meeting in June, because Mike West and I need to make a decision soon, hopefully early next week, as to what we're going to do at that particular meeting. And I'm just curious as to what folks are thinking. Would folks be comfortable with a hybrid meeting where we'd have some folks there in person? Or do you think it's not something that you want to consider at this point and maybe push that into August? So if I could just get a few comments, Mr. Chairman, in terms of what folks think about that, that would be, I think, helpful to both you and me.
Thanks, Chris. Let me bring I'm going to bring my screen up. I'll let you know. I mean, and we're going to have an opportunity to talk about this, but I think the biggest challenge for me is, well, I can't, as a state employee of the state of Maryland, I will.
We lost you, Mike.
Sorry, Chris. My mute went back on. I just wanted to tell you, I just wanted to let you know, and we'll get some other feedback. I see a few hands up on the screen right now, but one of the challenges that I'm going to have, and while I support the idea of a hybrid, in-person, maybe some virtual component meeting, as a state employee, and my other colleagues from the other states in the Mid-Atlantic may be challenged with the same issue. I've been told that I can't leave the state until I'm vaccinated fully. So I don't have. I'm on a long list, and I haven't been given any information yet. So it's one of those things where I would say that I would support an in-person meeting, and if I can, I'll be there. But I may be faced with some challenges depending on how that vaccination process goes for COVID. And so I'll leave it there and see what others have to say. I have Tony and Chris. We'll go to Tony Delernia first. Go ahead, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, Mike, I was going to mention something similar to what you just said. Although I don't attend these as a representative of NYSERDA, my employment with NYSERDA in the state prohibits me from traveling on NYSERDA related business at this time. So I'm not so sure how much, and I think that may apply to some of the other state directors that sit on our council. So that may be an issue. But as an individual, currently as an individual member sitting on the council, I am allowed to travel. I would be more inclined to wait until the August meeting for traveling myself. I was just wondering, Chris, what's scheduled for the June meeting? Is there something that we really should be doing in person at this point? And I like the idea of the hybrid meetings very much. If I have the opportunity to attend the June meeting in a hybrid form, that's probably what I would personally do. But maybe Chris can give me some idea of the draft agenda for June.
Mary, if you go back to the other. Yeah, I went through this really quickly, Tony. There you go. A big part of the meeting is going to be action on the Bluefish Allocation and Rebuilding Amendment. That's going to be a joint action with the Bluefish Board. The executive committee is going to meet to look at advisory panel appointment recommendations. You can see the other things that we plan.
I see it all there. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, so I mean, I believe, Mr. Chairman, a hybrid might be good for the June meeting. By August, I'd be ready to go, and I'm sure I'll be given the clearance to travel. But personally, at this point, I'm more inclined to go towards a hybrid meeting for June. Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks, Tony. Appreciate that. I'm going to go to Chris next, and then I have Mike Pentney after Chris. Go ahead, Chris. Pat Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I could support a hybrid format for the June meeting. I should be able to attend. Vaccinations have been available for people in my county 18 and older, and I should be fully vaccinated next week. So I should be able to travel out of state. And I think whether we do it or not is going to really depend on whether other key people can travel or not. If it's just a few people there, and everyone else is online, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, looking at the agenda, I think the final action on the Bluefish Allocation and Rebuilding Amendment. I could see some value in meeting in person. These allocation actions are difficult anyways, and I think having some in-person communication, like in between the meeting and during the breaks, could maybe help maybe resolve some reach some consensus on some final actions that are sometimes a little more challenging to do in just a remote format. So anyways, that's just my thoughts on this right now. Definitely look forward to hearing what other people have to say. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And that came up earlier this week when we were dealing with the sector allocation amendment, and then the idea that it would be better to be able to do that in person. I completely agree, but let's get some other feedback. I have three hands, so I'm going to go to Mike Pentney, and then I have Adam, and then Eric. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I mean, to the question at hand, I think at this point, the agency is still under a travel prohibition. I haven't heard anything about relaxing that or looking at new standards, based on vaccine status. So at this point, I can't say for sure that I'd be allowed to travel. It's very possible that we will still be under a travel prohibition at that meeting. I don't know how quickly that might change, but certainly can't commit at this time.
Yeah, understood, Mike. And things are changing every day. I just got notice that in our state, anyone over 16 now is eligible. I haven't been eligible for a vaccine until today, but that information just came out. So I'll be looking at that to see if I can get that vaccination so I'll be able to travel, but I still have to get the governor to support that. So I completely understand those of us in government. We might have some challenges, in the coming months, but we're going to have to decide on this relatively soon. And that's what Chris's point was, that we we're going to need to, Wes and Chris and I are going to need to decide on how we're going to conduct this meeting for June. We're going to need to make that decision pretty quickly. So let me see who else I have on my list. Okay, I've got Adam. I've got a bunch of hands now. So go ahead, Adam. You're next. Adam Nowalski.
Has there been any conversation with the commission yet about what they would be willing to do for June? Because if they are not of a similar mindset, then that does take away the advantage of the joint meeting with them.
Nope.
Well,
no, not, yep, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I haven't had the direct conversation with Bob yet. We have had in the past conversations about hybrid meetings. Potentially, obviously we should talk to him about the joint part of the meeting. It's not a showstopper though. I mean, potentially they could be there virtually for the Bluefish thing. We could be there in person. So there's all kinds of possibilities, but the direct answer to the question is no. I have not yet explored this with Bob.
Yeah, so they talked about it at a recent executive committee meeting. And Chris, that's something we should talk to Bob about, because Bob proposed maybe a plan to do some hybrid style meetings, or maybe do 2 or 3 in-person meetings a year and maybe do a virtual meeting once a year with the commission. So I think it just comes down to who's willing to travel, and it's hard to, I think there's a whole bunch of paths forward. Personally, I'd like to get to see everybody again and get back to the in-person meeting. It's challenging as chair to do this virtually for the last year. It's a challenging thing. So I personally would like to get back together but as long as we're all safe and we're not compromising individuals' health. I mean, I think that's the most important thing. Eric Reed, I have you up next, and then Wes Townsend, you'll go after Eric. Go ahead, Eric. Eric, if you're speaking, Eric, we can't hear you.
How about now?
There you go. Now I can hear you now.
Okay. Well, Adam actually asked my question. I was thinking on the same lines as Adam. I mean, you put the commission, the board into this, it puts a whole nother level of complications into travel or hybrid, or, a hybrid meeting is not going to be something easy to pull off. Of course, we can hardly get through one. We've been doing these meetings for a year. It's hard to get through one the way we're doing it now without some issue. And a hybrid meeting is a whole nother level of complexity, and I would not want to be staff navigating the first hybrid meeting for sure. I mean, honestly, I would love to go to Virginia Beach for June, but I just don't see it as being the prudent thing to do. However, I would dump Philly in a minute in August and put Virginia Beach in August. That would be okay with me. So those are just my thoughts. Thank you.
Now, Eric, that Philly's my favorite town, right? So I don't know that that's a possibility. I think the commitment with the hotel is something about, and Chris can talk to that. But it's I understand your point though. Let's see what others have to say. I have a number of hands up right now. I'm going to go to Wes next, and then Ellen, you'll be up after Wes. Go ahead, Wes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering if we could get the staff to maybe send out a poll saying, okay, do you think you're going to go? Maybe, definite no, because it's only going to be 2 or 3 people. Like I'm definitely would go. I'm willing and able to go. But if it's only going to be 2 or 3 people, there's probably no sense in having people in person there. But I mean, if we've got a majority, maybe we can have a hybrid meeting down there.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good point, Wes. And you know what I'm going to do? Given the time we've spent this morning on these topics, I'm going to ask Chris if that is a possibility to do just a I don't know, I guess it's maybe a survey of the council members to
Sure.
provide that information. That way we can just move on, and then we can use that information. Maybe if we can get that done between now and early next week, then we can, Wes, you and I and other staff can discuss how we're going to move forward.
So I suggest we do this, Mr. Chairman. Let's,
Okay.
Stephen, if you could clear the hands, and I apologize for the folks that want to make a statement. If you could clear all those hands for me. Raise your hand if you think, based on everything you know today, that you would attend an in-person meeting in June at Virginia Beach. Raise your hand.
I'll tell you, Chris, I'm trying to raise my hand. I'm trying to find the right, I haven't had to.
So we have,
so add me to the list. I can't find the hand raise function.
So we have about 11 folks that indicate that they would do it. So I think based on that information, Mr. Chairman, 12, there's another one, Dewey. Based on that information, you 13, Chris Bat Savage. So we have more folks coming in. So it looks like 13 or 14 folks have indicated that they would be interested. So you, Wes, and I will talk about that early next week because we do have to make a decision soon if we're going to get our money back from the hotel. And
no, I understood.
Even though Eric would like to go to Virginia Beach in August, we can't do it because we're locked into that hotel in Philly, which is a nice hotel, by the way. So thanks for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman and everyone. If I preempted folks that may have wanted to make a comment, so if you want to go back to comments quickly, I have a few other things I want to talk about, but certainly we have a little time left.
Yeah, no, I think we're good with that, Chris. And Mike Penny's hand's still up, and Ellen Boland. So why don't I take one or two more comments, and then we'll move on. We'll just try to make it quick, guys, if you can. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just one comment. I guess when you and when you, Chris, and are thinking about this, please give some thought to. If a hybrid model is you have some voting members in person and some not, ways to ensure, if that's going to be the case, consider the fact that the people who are virtual might feel or be disadvantaged in participating in the meeting because they're not able to be in the room.
Okay, yeah, we'll give that some thought. Appreciate that. Ellen?
Thanks. I'll be brief. I just wanted to flag that as of April 1st in Virginia, the limit on indoor gatherings is 50 people. I think that could possibly increase by June, but I did want to flag that there may actually still be state restrictions in Virginia that would prohibit everybody from being able to be in the same room, particularly if we do a joint board council meeting. I, however, would really like to see people, but wanted to flag that.
Yep. Appreciate that, Ellen. If you can keep Chris in the loop on changes that happened in Virginia, that would be fantastic. That way we can yeah, that would be great. I appreciate that. Okay. We're going to go ahead and move on. Chris, thanks for that part of your presentation, but you can go ahead and continue if you're ready for it.
I'm ready
to move on.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks everyone for your indulgence and that input. Speaking of meetings, there's a 2022 meeting schedule in the briefing book as well. Take a look at that and see that we do have in-person meetings scheduled for 2022. Hopefully those will all be in person at some of the same places that we typically meet at. There's one change because I listened to Sunny and got as close as I could to Ocean City, and we actually have a meeting scheduled in Dewey Beach in October of 2022. So that's as close as I could get, Sunny. So hopefully that works for you. The next item on the tab is status council actions under development. Again, an important resource for everyone as they try to remember what we're doing and when we're doing it. And certainly that applies to the next tab, the next item beyond the tab, which is the timeline and status of our actions and amendments and frameworks under review, just to give you an idea of where we're at in terms of those. Also the next document in terms of specifications, so what we have planned for those. Any questions about any of that before I move on?
I don't see any hands, Chris.
Okay. Next item behind the tab is something that we put in there because there's a lot of interest from council members and stakeholders and the public about what was going on with the information that we had for black sea bass. This is a letter that was sent to me, basically updating us in terms of the black sea bass information that folks were interested in for 2019. So you can take a look at that. I'm not going to go through that document. The next item behind the tab is a letter to the new Secretary of the Interior that we sent in relative to the review they're doing of the commercial fishing prohibitions in the Northeast Canyons and seamounts. The important part of that letter, if you go through it, you can basically look at how we structured it, but it talks about where the councils have been relative to our work on these particular issues. And again, I'm not going to read this to you, but I think the takeaway is found in the second paragraph that says, any fishing restrictions within the Northeast Marine Monument should be developed through the science-based participatory management process required by the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation and Management Act. And the Mid-Atlantic Council joins the 7 other councils in unanimous opposition to the use of the Antiquities Act of 1906 to implement fishing restrictions in the U.S. EEZ. Next item behind the tab is another letter to the Secretary of the Interior. There's also one to the Secretary of Commerce. And this is a CCC letter, basically providing their perspective on Section 216A. Yesterday, remember, we talked about 216C. This is on 216A, the executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, and talks about a variety of things that apply to that particular issue and how the councils have been involved with that in the past. Again, this isn't something I'm going to read to you, but certainly something that you should look at. And I'd be glad to answer any questions at this point about any of those letters before we move on. Any questions?
Any questions for Chris? Anyone from the public? I don't see any hands at this time, Chris, so I think we can probably just move on.
Okay, so the next item behind the tab is our news release that went out in February about our public hearings for bluefish allocation and rebuilding amendment, and the fact that we are accepting comments until April 23rd of this month. And again, there's information that I think that folks have seen before. Our last hearing will be tonight associated with New Jersey. It's all virtual, obviously. One of the things that has happened recently is that Matt has been invited to get on the radio, or I guess it's actually a podcast, with a group to talk about the amendment, and certainly look forward to hearing that podcast, Matt. And next is a press release on our advisory panel process, something I referred to earlier. The application deadline for this is Friday, April 23rd. I appreciate everyone that's helped us get the word out in terms of what we're doing with our APs, or advisory panels. We've had 47 applications to date. We have about 96 folks that currently serve on our advisory panels. If it works out the way that it's worked out in the past, we typically get a flood of applications right before the deadline on the 23rd. But we should try as hard as we can as a group to get the word out. So if in fact you could, counsel, spread the word through your networks, that'd be great. Remember that we have one additional panel this year that we're soliciting membership for. That's the Communication and Outreach Advisory Panel. That's part of the press release as well, and explaining what we're trying to do there. Okay, any questions on any of that?
Eric Reed, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's no question. I just, under my report on next Tuesday, I will be certain to mention the AP deadline to the people in New England, because we've got quite a few of those on our panels as well. So
yeah,
that's it.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, and before you move on, Chris, I failed to mention, I don't think you said it, but I just wanted the council members to know that the monument discussion that we had that meeting with the Department of Interior, and I provided testimony as well as the New England Council leadership regarding our comments that we wanted to make regarding the consideration for changes to the monument status. So I just wanted everyone. I thought of it as soon as you started up your other part of your briefing. So with that said, if you want to continue, Chris, I don't see any other hands. Let me look again. I don't see any other hands at this time, so we can keep moving.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's this is an email that we received basically indicating that the interim final rule to continue to provide the authority to waive observer coverage on a case-by-case basis was issued. It's a continuation of the response of NOAA to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is of interest to the council. We weighed in on this in the past, certainly earlier when we were first dealing with the pandemic. We were very concerned about observer coverage, and again, this is a continuation of the service's efforts related to that particular topic. The next item beyond the tab relates to the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel. We thought at this particular meeting that we'd be looking at a revision to the charter, but we don't have one. So we don't have to look at it at this meeting. We expect that we'll be looking at adjustments to the charter maybe in June or even later, and certainly we'll look forward to that. Speaking of NTAP, there is a document that is a supplement to the tab that's titled Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel Proposed Use of Available Research Funds 2021. And this is a proposal that was put forward to NTAP by Jim Gartland. There's the title, which is quantifying the impact of a restrictor rope on the composition, rate, and size distribution of catch derived from a bottom trawl survey. This is something that we suggest actually get funded, but it's actually up to the council. And the way that I think we should work this, Mr. Chairman, is have, since folks probably haven't seen this document until today, take a look at that document. If anyone has any comments or concerns, relay those to Matt or to me, and we'll let the NTAP folks know. Wes is also co-chair of NTAP, and I don't know if Wes or Matt, if you have anything else to add before we move on, now would be a good time to mention it.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things. We did meet a couple times this winter looking at changing the charter, and it looks like the way we're going to be adding an action plan to the charter to fulfill NTAP's objectives, and I'll report on that as soon as we get it finalized. And then with this funding, do I need to make a formal motion for it, or is this going to be, can we pass it by consensus? What path do we need to take?
So based on my conversations with Matt, I don't think we need a formal motion. Matt, if you're on, you want to talk about where we're at with this particular proposal?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. So as you indicated, I don't think we need a formal motion, but I believe that the NTAP wants, confirmation from both this council and the New England Council that, they're willing to support this proposed research going forward. And I do understand, as you indicated, that this document was put forth as supplemental material. It came in a little later than we were hoping, but it took some time to get everything together. Wes, I don't know specifically if you want to try to get some consensus on this, or if you think it is better to wait, we can do that. And I believe Dr. Hare may touch on some of this during his report as well from the Science Center. So Wes, I kind of want to turn it back to you for some direction. So thanks.
I mean, I think this is something, if we could just get a consensus, something that we can send to the NSTAP committee, so that way they know they can go ahead with it. And then since new Northeast is going to be doing theirs next week as well, that way they know the money will be there because they want to get this project started pretty quickly. And because they're going to be doing it, when are they going to be doing it? No, I guess it won't be till next year. But at least, you know, they'll have the money and they can be doing all the preliminary work for it.
So before we move on, Mr. Chairman, Matt, what's the timing? What is the timing, or Wes? What is the timing for this? So if they're proposing this research, it's proposed for next year, right?
Yeah, Mary, can you please scroll down a little bit to the second page? There you go. So, you know, things have just been put forward. We're waiting for, obviously, approval from both councils. You can see in the summer of this year, working to populate a working group with the NTAP to refine, you know, the objectives and the development, and then finalizing those objectives later in the year. And then obviously conducting the field experiment is proposed for the spring and fall of 2022.
So given this this time frame, if we waited till June, the June council meeting, to actually formally adopt this, would that be too late?
I'm not positive of the approach there. I do see that Dr. Hare has his hand raised. Maybe you want to go to him on this?
John?
Thank you, Chris. I'll check on the June council meeting. And just to give some background to the council, the way we have been sort of operating in NTAP is NTAP has been making recommendations, and then the Science Center has been acting on those recommendations. So the gear efficiency work on the Karen Elizabeth was an NTAP recommendation. The Science Center, had the funds obligated, worked with NTAP to execute that work. The spreading, overspreading, underspreading of evaluation on the Karen Elizabeth was handled separately, similarly. The observation was made that, that process of NTAP making a recommendation and the Science Center acting was not the way it was spelled out in the charter. The way it is spelled out in the charter is that NTAP makes a recommendation to the councils. The councils then evaluate and agree or don't agree. And then basically the Science Center acts. In terms of the rush on this, and this is why we have been going NTAP to the Science Center acting, is because we have obligation deadlines. Typically get our money, not in October 1, we get it, at some point later in the year. This year it was late January. And then we need to obligate by May 1. And so, we need to either have a decision on this at this meeting or soon thereafter, or agree that, we won't obligate the funds. And then we would look for funds in 22 to support this work. So again, it's in part trying to be true to the charter, but recognizing that slows us down in terms of our ability to act.
Okay, thanks for that. So the only issue is that folks are just looking at this now, right? And haven't had a chance to really think about it. Maybe, Mr. Chair, what we could do is basically ask the council to review it, see if they, within a week, if they have any questions or comments. If we don't get anything significant that indicates any opposition to it, then in fact we can indicate to the Science Center that in fact we approve it. I think maybe Eric or Terry Alexander also have some comments. Eric.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to give some additional background. I mean, I think this project is very worthwhile funding. It absolutely, in my mind, is necessary. The work to standardize the bottom trawl, basically it's going to stabilize the trawl itself, so it will be interchangeable from any boat that is big enough to carry the scientific crew and tow the net. And the net's not very big, so I think just about anybody can tow it. And just to give you, my last little bit was Durana R has already worked on this restrictor cable, the use of the restrictor cable. They've already invested physical, mental, and capital of their own. They actually went out after some legs of their NEMAP survey and did it on their own time, and VIMS helped them with it. That's what those guys think about the validity of this work. So I would strongly suggest, and I'll do the same thing in New England next week, that this council adopt this particular funding mechanism as soon as possible so there is no delay to the spring 2022 survey. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Eric, for that. Terry, Alexander, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to explain to everybody that this money that we have to spend was rolled over because of COVID last fall with work we couldn't do, and it has to be spent by the end of this fall, sometime this fall, or that money goes away. We have the cash to do the project. It's a very important project. And next week at the New England Council, Wes and I co-chair this committee together. And I'm hoping that we have some sort of a consensus at our council, which my council is actually seeing this letter go out to them tomorrow in the council packet. I sent it to Janice yesterday explaining the work. So they'll have a little more time. So hopefully we'll get some kind of consensus out of us next week and you guys next week, because it was important to get this done by April so that we could get it on the agenda for this year. So we don't have time to delay till June. It's important to get this done in the next week or so. So just want to lay it out there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. I think in listening to the discussion and having just seen this, I think what we could do is follow Chris Moore's guidance to send this out to the council with a time frame of a few days into maybe early to mid next week. If there are objections, they should be made known. But if there are no objections, then we would follow along and get this over to the service. That's what you had been thinking, right, Chris?
Yes.
Okay. Terry, did you have a follow-up? Your hand's still up.
No, sorry. I'll take it out.
That's okay. All right, so I think we have a plan, Chris, and Wes, and we'll move forward in that manner as you recommended. So we can continue with your report.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we do have a plan for it, and we'll do that. The next item behind the tab relates to offshore wind. So remember that we had a request that, in fact, at every council meeting we do an offshore wind energy update, and Julia is the staff person responsible for offshore wind energy updates, and she has prepared a memo for me behind the tab. Again, this isn't something that I'm going to read to you, but basically there is some additional information in there that you should read and should check out. In fact, take a look at those the web pages or the web page for additional update. We do expect that we will have a more detailed update on wind energy development at our June council meeting. And again, we'll reach out to the individual offshore wind project developers to have them involved in that particular update. As we've talked about several times during the week, wind energy development is going to become an important component of, I think, each council meeting in terms of discussions and impacts and plans and how we're dealing with that, both from a management perspective as well as a science perspective, as it relates to how these individual projects could impact the surveys that are important to the council. So again, there's a lot of information there. There is also a attached, or after that last document beyond the tab, there's an email from Brian Hooker to us, basically talking about the announcement from the White House and the Department of Interior about a series of coordinated steps taken by the Biden administration to support offshore wind development, including commitment by Interior Energy and Commerce to establish a target to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, creating nearly 80,000 jobs and so on. And again, you can click on those links to find additional information on those particular topics if you're interested. Last but not least, there's also a supplemental tab, or a supplement to the tab from Wolfgang Rang on the activities associated with surveys for U.S. Wind's Marwind project off the coast of Maryland. Those have already, if this is true, they've already commenced to start on April 1, and they'll be completed by June 30th. Any information about those particular, that particular issue, you can find there, the contact information there. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that's it for the information behind the tab, but we do have one follow-up from our conversation yesterday, and that is whether or not we want to do a letter, being put together a letter from the council to the service related to the topic that we talked about yesterday regarding executive order and climate change and adaptation. I got the sense yesterday that, in fact, a letter would be something that folks would support. If I'm wrong, now's a good time to tell me.
Yeah, I thinking back to yesterday, I think the letter would be helpful. If anyone opposes us putting a letter together, now would be the time to speak. But if I don't see any hands, I'll assume that the council supports that action. Okay, I don't. Tony DeLernia, go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, Mike, thanks a lot. I do appreciate it. I do want to see the council send a letter. I was just trying to, well, how are we going to determine what is included in the letter? That's my only question, really. What do we decide what goes into that letter?
Well, I could Chris could give us some insight on that, but the way I think it would happen would be that staff would listen to the discussion that we had with Paul yesterday and formulate a response that could be, Chris, I assume that letter would go out to the council for comments, and then if comments are received, they could be incorporated. If not, then we would send what staff put together on that. But maybe you can give us some more insight as to how that would develop.
I'm good with that. Just as long as we get an opportunity to review before it goes out and make comments. And naturally, I suspect that the comments that we make are substantial, then it'll have to go back out to the council for a second review. So,
yeah, I think it's a good opportunity for the council to have an to be able to review and provide comment to staff after they put an initial document together.
All right,
Chris, am I on the right page with that, Chris?
Yeah, exactly. I think what we might actually do one more step, and that's reach out before we actually draft a letter, reach out to the council and say, what do you have ideas for what you want to highlight in terms of recommendations to the service on climate adaptation, and see what kind of response we get from that. Put the draft letter together, certainly get that letter out for everyone to look at, comment on before we actually send it in.
I got you. Okay. Yeah, that works for me.
Good for me too. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Tony. I don't see any other hands. So Chris, did you have anything else you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, one last thing. Yeah, okay. One last thing, Mr. Chairman. So we have, I think folks know that Jan retired in December. We haven't had a Jan since then. I will be putting out a recruitment notice for an administrative support specialist. Watch for that. If folks know of anyone that's interested, certainly let them know about the job opportunity and have them contact me. And certainly, last but not least, I want to basically thank my staff for all their hard work this week and all their hard work in getting all the material together for this week's meeting. I think folks know that we changed the the format in terms of or the software that we use to do these virtual meetings, and things have gone extremely well this week in terms of the technology, staff presentations. We made a lot of decisions that I think that should make us all proud. I'm extremely proud of the staff and certainly all their hard work. So I just wanted to say that, and thanks everyone. And if there's any questions or comments, Mr. Chair, I'd be glad to take those.
Thanks for those comments, Chris. And I was going to say something as well. I've been trying to reach out to staff just to thank them for everything they've done over the last year, not just for this meeting, but just the hard work and effort that's been put into kind of working under the constraints that we've worked on. I haven't gotten to everyone yet, but I'm taking it one step at a time, trying to make sure that I communicate directly as chair with staff to thank them and to make sure that they know that they're appreciated. So I appreciate those comments, Chris. Thank you. Okay. Well, that concludes the executive director's report. I'm going to take let's take 5 minutes and come back at 12:20 for our wrap up on organization reports and liaison reports. I just need a couple minutes to step away from my computer. So we'll come back at 12:20 to finish things up. Thanks. Okay, welcome back, everyone. It's 12:20. I'd like to get started back to finishing out our agenda for the day. Our first organization report is the regional office, so I'll turn to Mike Pentney for that report. Mike, if you're there. All right, Mike might not be back yet. Let's give him just another second.
Oh, sorry, were you looking for me?
Yep. Yeah, Mike, can you hear me okay?
Can.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, if you're back and ready for your report, we'd be happy to receive it. Thanks.
All right, just let me get a sip of my coffee and ready to go. So yeah, I've got a number of things to brief for council on. Getting some feedback, maybe. I don't know if that's you, Mike. And then, as always, I'll try to take any questions that people may have.
Okay.
So starting off with summer flounder recreational measures, on April 6th, we published our proposed rule to implement the rec measures for 2021. We propose, consistent with the council and the commission's recommendation, maintaining conservation equivalency, as well as maintaining the current non-preferred coastwide and precautionary default measures. The comment period on that rule closes on April 21st. For Atlantic surf clams, we published proposed rule on February 17th, soliciting comments on our 21 through 26 surf clam and ocean quahog specs. We received 4 comments during the comment period that closed on March 4th, and we're working on the final rule to get that out as soon as possible. March 4th, we published a proposed rule for the revised 2021 and 2022 specs for spiny dogfish, consistent with the recommendations of the Mid-Atlantic Council and using the updated risk policy. Comment period closed on March 19th, and we're developing the final rule to implement that as soon as possible. Well, by May 1. On January 15th, we received a petition for rulemaking from an organization called the Scallopers Campaign, requesting secretarial action to develop a leasing program for the limited access scallop fishery. As we often do with such requests for rulemaking, we sent the letter to the New England Fishery Management Council asking for its review and input on the substance of the proposal and the merits before we make a decision on whether to proceed with rulemaking through secretarial action. We expect that the New England Council will discuss the petition at its upcoming meetings next week and potentially in June. On April 1st, we published an interim final rule for Framework 8 to the Atlantic Herring FMP, which reduces the Atlantic Herring quotas for 2021 through 2023 relative to 2020, and modifies in-season management measures to allow for the Atlantic herring fleet to have slightly more access to the Atlantic mackerel fishery. The rule was effective March 29th, but because it was an interim final rule, we're actually taking public comments on it through April 30th. Just a few days later, we had to publish a temporary rule closing the Atlantic herring directed fishery in Management Area 3 and reducing the possession limit to 2,000 pounds. That was because the landings were projected to exceed 98% of the sub-ACL, which was the closure threshold required by the herring FMP. And that temporary rule is effective through the end of the calendar year. On March 31st, we published a proposed rule to approve the fishing year 2021 and 2022 operations plans and contracts for our groundfish sectors, which include several regulatory exemptions for all 16 sectors, allocates the sectors their 2021 annual catch entitlements, and announces default specs for 7 groundfish stocks. And also announces our determination that the audit model EM program may be used to meet sector monitoring requirements. The comment period on that is open through April 15th, and we will be quickly turning that around and doing the best job we can to get the final rule implemented by May 1. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman, but as I said, I'll try to take any questions that people may have.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Appreciate your report. As always, this is an opportunity for questions for Mike regarding actions by the service. Tony DeLernia, I just saw your hand go up. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Mr. Petney, I've been contacted by some for-hire vessels about a possible experimental fishery for the species that they fish for, some of flounder, scuppel, black sea bass, in 2022. Now, to apply for an experimental fishery permit, am I correct in assuming that there's going to have to be some amount of quota or research set aside done during the specification process in order to have a small bit of quota that could be applied towards that fishery? And if that's the case, I think we do that in August. So, or if it's only, maybe say 40, 50,000 pounds total, do we need a set aside? Thank you.
So, in the words of our illustrious attorney, the answer is it depends. The specifics of the EFP request, what regulations would be exempted as part of the project, is critical to understand before we would know whether a set aside would be necessary. Typically, a research set aside of some form would be necessary for someone to fish during the close season, but not necessarily for some other purposes. Trying a different gear type or handling measures. I'm not sure. Obviously, knowing nothing about the specifics of the project that people are interested in pursuing, it's impossible to be able to say now whether we would need a set aside. But so I would encourage the applicants to get in touch with our staff as soon as possible to kind of sketch out the project and see what aspects of the regulations they might need exemptions from, and then that can help inform whether we would need to provide some sort of set aside if the council and the board agreed to do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Tony. Thanks, Mike, for that answer. Anyone else have any questions for Mike? Anyone from the public have any questions for Mike? Is there anyone just on the phone that wants to ask any questions? Just please feel free to speak up before we go to the next report. Okay, hearing nothing. Mike, thank you for your report. Appreciate it as always. And thanks for the question, Tony. So let's go next to our next report on the agenda, which is the Science Center report. And I'm going to turn to John Hare. John, do you have a report for us?
I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have, a fair amount of material. I'll try to move through it quickly. In terms of our survey activities, again, our goal is to be fully successful this year. Recognizing it's likely to be challenging. Our aerial surveys are continuing for the North Atlantic right whale. Bottom trawl survey had a 2-day delay to leg 1, but then successfully completed, and leg 2 is scheduled to sail. I believe it's April 12th. Our bottom longline survey, which works up in the Gulf of Maine, is scheduled to sail on April 12th. And our coastal shark longline survey is scheduled to sail on April 12th as well. We also have our spring Ecomon survey scheduled in May, where the mackerel to support the mackerel assessment, and then we have our other surveys in line, but I won't go through those now. In terms of our observer program and fisheries monitoring and research division, Amanda McCarty, who is our division chief, has started a detail at the White House to work on the president's climate executive order. So that'll be a 1-year detail. So we are finalizing the individuals who will be covering that position while Amanda's working out of the White House. Again, observer and fishing captain and crew health and safety remain a top priority for us in the Northeast as well as for the agency. And many of you may have seen that on March 25th, NOAA Fisheries issued a rule to continue to provide the authority to waive observer coverage in response to the pandemic. And, as part of this emergency action, NOAA Fisheries regional administrators and office directors and science center directors will be able to continue to use the waivers that are in place. And so our observer deployment stance remains unchanged, and our emphasis on sort of health and safety of people at sea remains high. In terms of the assessments, there is a lot going on. The ELEX Research Track Working Group has been meeting. The haddock Research Track Working Group has been meeting, and the Butterfish Research Track Working Group has been meeting, and they have meetings scheduled in the next to get to the end point, and those schedules are on our Research Track webpage. We also are forming 6 additional Research Track Working Groups for the 2022 and 2023 Research Track assessments. These include American Place, spiny dogfish, black sea bass, bluefish, Atlantic cod, and then a topics-based research track applying state-based model. The time period for individuals to express interest closed on March 29th, and we will be sort of putting those groups together in the next several weeks. The Assessment Oversight Panel meeting for the June management track assessments was held on February 25th. Stocks that will be reviewed in that peer review are Atlantic mackerel, which will be a level 2 assessment, black sea bass, which will be a level 1 assessment, bluefish, which will be a level 1 assessment, golden tilefish, which will be a level 2, scup, which will be a level 2, and summer flounder, which will be a level 1. And that research, peer review meeting is scheduled for June 21st to July 1st. The next assessment oversight panel meeting for the fall assessments will be on May 20th. And that peer review and assessment oversight panel will largely focus on Georges Bank and Gulf of Maine stocks. We have been trying to sort of describe the assessment process, in a sort of better or more communicative fashion, and so we've created some infographics similar to some of the illustrations that were part of the State of the Ecosystem Report, and I can share that link with Chris Moore later today for him to forward to the council. We understand that the 22 assessments are going to have missing data, and at the February 27th Assessment Oversight Panel meeting, there was a discussion about how we would handle catch assumptions for those assessments, and we've been really focusing on how to use the models to basically have that gap in data. So those conversations continue and will be presented at Assessment Oversight Panel meetings in terms of what the plan is for upcoming assessments. Our cooperative research group has been busy. They hosted a series, two sort of webinar sessions, cooperative research and COVID-19 in February and March. I participated, listened in on both of them. They were excellent to hear about how different groups were addressing the challenges that COVID presented for working at sea. The cooperative research group also published a paper, Northern Short Fin Squid Fishery Footprint on the Northeast U.S. continental shelf, and that publication came out of work and research sort of discussed at the Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Management Council in the past. Bottom longline survey again is sailing soon, and we've already talked about the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel. In terms of our wind activities, we know that offshore wind is going to be sort of a large use of the ocean that we as fisheries management, protected species management are going to need to work towards coexistence. 2,000 turbines planned by 2030, potentially more, given the recent announcement at the White House. State of Maine has announced its intention for a research lease for a floating array in the Gulf of Maine. And the pace and scale of development continues to exceed our ability to plan and react. And so we're getting more resources, and we are putting pieces in place to work in this new ecosystem-based multiple ocean use realm, but the pace still seems to be faster than we're able to get there. In terms of ecosystem-based fisheries management, we had excellent presentations at this council meeting, Sarah Geitjes, so I won't go into that anymore. Similarly, in terms of climate change work, had a presentation from Vince Saba, so won't go into that anymore. An RSA program, the Scallop RSA awards were announced March 15th, and if anyone's interested, I can send you the link to that. And we've started, New England Fisheries Management Council is leading, and Northeast Fisheries Science Center is co-chairing a Scallop Survey Strategy Working Group, and that group's first meeting is tomorrow. It's got 19 members, and the idea is to develop sort of a longer-term strategy for how we are surveying the resource, combining across Northeast Fisheries Science Center survey resources and the RSA research set-aside program for Atlantic Scallop, which also supports several different survey activities. On the protected species front, just, again, our North Atlantic right whale surveys, our aerial surveys are continuing. We've flown about 135 hours since January 14th, and we've observed 114 right whales. So there are a lot of right whales in the area, large concentrations in Cape Cod Bay, and large concentrations also south of the Vineyard. And that information, working collaboratively with New England Aquarium and Center for Coastal Studies, is used to inform the ship speed, dynamic ship speed rules, which the regional office has been putting out. And so with that, I will end and take any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks, John. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Hare? Any comments? I see Jim Fletcher with his hand up. Go ahead, Jim. If you're talking, Jim, we can't hear you.
Will any of these web tracks be accessible with web access, or is it in person only?
I'm not sure which meetings, or what are you referring to specifically in terms of web tracks? Or the research tracks?
Research, rather than driving to up there, it would be nice to be able to sit here in the office and listen.
Yeah, all of our, with COVID, all of our meetings have been remote. And, similar to how the council is thinking about how to hold these into the future, we are thinking about that as well, but they are remote, and people can dial in. And so I can make sure that the access information is available to you, Mr. Fletcher, and I'll make sure it's available to all the council members as well. So I'll take care of that once we finish here today. Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. Thanks, Jim. Anyone else have any questions for the Science Center at this time? Okay, seeing no additional hands, Dr. Hare, thank you for your report. We're going to move on to the Office of General Counsel. John Almeida, do you have a report for us today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
There you go.
For the last several council meetings, I've been providing updates on 3 different cases relating to river herring, where we've basically been waiting on court decisions Since our last meeting, NIMS received a favorable ruling in one of these cases. In Flaherty v. Raimondo, this was a case in the District of Columbia regarding Amendment 5 to the Herring FMP. Judge Kelly issued a decision on the parties' motions for summary judgment on March 26th. You may recall that this case involved claims that NIMS violated Magnuson-Stevens Act and the Administrative Procedure Act by not disapproving Amendment 5 due to its failure to include river herring and shad stocks as part of the Atlantic herring fishery. Judge Kelly ruled that Magnuson does not require the Secretary to consider in each amendment whether stocks need to be added to the fishery. The judge also ruled that the agency satisfied NEPA's obligations to take a hard look at a reasonable range of alternatives. Judge Kelly held that while the amendment included measures relating to bycatch of river herring and shad, that did not impose an obligation to consider alternatives to add river herring and shad as stocks in the fishery, because that wasn't within the scope of the amendment's goals and objectives. So that was a favorable ruling for the agency. And the other two river herring cases, the Natural Resource Defense Council case regarding the 2019 Endangered Species Act listing determination, and the Anglers Conservation Network case on river herring and shad as stocks in the mackerel FMP. Those ones were still waiting on rulings relating to the administrative record issues before the cases can be briefed on the merits. So one case, we got a ruling, the other two we're still waiting. There's been a new lawsuit filed against the New England Council's Herring Amendment 8, which is a challenge to the inshore midwater trawl restricted area. And that case is captioned Sustainable Fisheries Coalition v. Raimondo, and that was filed in the District of Massachusetts. The plaintiffs there claim that the amendment, in as much as it's the inshore midwater trawl restricted area, violates national standards 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8, as well as the Administrative Procedure Act. NIMS filed the administrative record and the answer to the complaint on April 2nd, and there's a briefing schedule in place that would have the case fully briefed on the merits by the end of August. The summer flounder litigation, you may recall, the state of New York filed a lawsuit challenging the summer flounder commercial allocation amendment and the 2021 specifications that use the new formula out of that amendment. Both sides have filed their opening briefs in support of their motions for summary judgment. The briefing is moving on a pretty fast track. It should be done by the end of April. With right whale litigation, not much to report. We've been filing status reports every 60 days. We filed one on March 30th. Our next one will be filed at the end of May. The two lawsuits on industry-funded monitoring, the challenges to the New England Council's industry-funded monitoring amendment. Nothing to report there. Both cases, the Loper Bright Fisheries case in the DC District Court and the Relentless case in the District of Rhode Island, they're both fully briefed on the merits, waiting for the court's decision. The challenge to the New England Council's Framework 59, the Gulf of Maine and Georges Bank cod specifications, the summary judgment briefing is complete and we're waiting on a decision from the court. You may recall the update I provided on the two sea turtle cases, Oceania sea turtle cases that had been kind of dormant for a while, waiting for court decisions. One of them with regard to the scallop fishery, NIMS received an adverse ruling. NIMS is working to address the deficiencies identified by the court with a court-imposed deadline of July 1st, 2021. In the other case, the same judge, this was regarding the batched fisheries biological opinion, and the court ruled in NIMS's favor. The plaintiffs, Oceania, appealed that to the DC Circuit, And on March 5th, the DC Circuit issued an order to put the appeal on hold until May 31st, 2021, which is the date when NIMS anticipates issuing a new batch fisheries biological opinion that would replace the one that was the subject of this litigation. So basically putting it on hold because the biological opinion at issue here is likely to be obsolete by that May 31st replacement biological opinion. And before I wrap up, at our last meeting, Mr. Fletcher asked a question that I wasn't able to answer. He asked whether the 1980 National Aquaculture Act provided the Secretary of Agriculture with the authority to issue permits for aquaculture in the EEZ. I consulted with some of my colleagues who work more extensively on aquaculture issues, and they indicated that the Department of Agriculture has never asserted that they have permitting authority over aquaculture projects in the EEZ. And it appears that the Aquaculture Act of 1980 wouldn't provide that kind of authority. That statute put the Secretary of Agriculture as the lead for coordination and dissemination of aquaculture information and as the permanent chair of the Interagency Aquaculture Coordinating Group. But that statute doesn't appear to provide permitting authority for aquaculture in the EEZ. That's it for my update. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Yeah, thanks, John, for your report. Let me see if anybody has any questions, any comments that they want to make. I don't see any members of the council with any questions, so I'll go to Mr. Fletcher. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, does that answer infer that the only way we can get a ruling is have to go to court of whether the Secretary of Agriculture has authority to issue permits in the EEZ? Because either I'm slow or that was an ambiguous answer. Thank you.
Do you want to clarify, John?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I was ambiguous. I apologize. The understanding that I have is that that statute doesn't give the Secretary of Agriculture the permitting authority.
Okay. James, did you have a follow-up on that? Did you want to ask another question, or are you good? Go ahead. I see your hand. Go ahead, Jim.
I'm good. I'll follow it up some other way. Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. I appreciate it. Thank you for your question. John, thank you for your report. I don't see any other hands raised at this time, so I'm going to move on to our next report. We're going to go to NOAA's Office of Law Enforcement. We have Caleb Gilbert here with us today for that report. So whenever you're ready, Caleb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Assistant Director Tim Donovan sends his regards. I've got a couple highlights to report from the Northeast Division of NOAA Fisheries Office of Law Enforcement today. First, an enforcement officer recently assisted, I believe last winter, in the seizure of 294 mitten crabs and approximately 160 pounds of blood clams from China, which were manifested as plastic storage bags. Both the crabs and clams were imported into JFK Airport, along with cartons of illegal duck tongues. The mitten crabs were seized by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the blood clams were destroyed by New York Department of Environmental Conservation. Mitten crabs, if you're not aware, are invasive species that burrow, causing damage to embankments and clog drainage systems. And blood clams are known to carry hepatitis A, typhoid, and dysentery. Now, we realize that these aren't necessarily high-profile species, but we wanted to mention this operation as there are other recent port inspection efforts that have led to the halt of thousands of pounds of illegally imported seafood import monitoring program species. For instance, an officer and U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers conducted the first shrimp and seafood inspection at the Detroit Port of Entry. While those investigations are ongoing and cannot be currently mentioned in more detail, these efforts will expand NED's efforts to combat international IUU. Next on my list, NED is collaborating with the Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary Office on a demonstration project to alert vessel operators of sensitive shipwreck sites, and encourage their avoidance while fishing. This project involves sending automated messages through OLE's VTRAC system. The VTRAC system is currently programmed to send out emails automatically to vessels through their VMS units when they're traveling at fishing speeds, when they're detected entering a programmed geofenced area. And that area is currently around 4 shipwrecks just south of the western Gulf of Maine closed area. We also want to highlight the use of emerging technologies in our operations. I know both Tim and I think the last 3 council meetings have discussed the pilot remote operated vehicle operations. That pilot operation in the fixed gear lobster fishery will become operational this summer, and a procurement package to purchase our own ROV is nearly complete. That our ROV will be compatible for deployment on U.S. Coast Guard and Joint Enforcement Agreement partner vessels. We are also in the early stages of development of an acoustic program on Stellwagen Bank, a mobile radar unit in the Great Lakes region, and utilization of drones in enforcement operations. A Special Agent Tony Forrest-Aire retired at the end of March 2021 after 30 years and 7 months of federal service. I actually don't think I ever met Tony, but I believe he served out of the Portland, Maine office. And there are numerous other staff changes within NED. We have tentative offers for special agents in Wall, New Jersey and Salisbury, Maryland that have been accepted. The New Bedford, Mass. Special agent billet was filled internally by an enforcement officer, leaving vacant his enforcement officer position that will be filled with a national enforcement officer hiring effort. Another special agent and an investigative analyst also recently departed and will need to be backfilled. And last, the deputy special agent in charge, Jeff Ray, is still on detail with the U.S. Coast Guard, and assistant special agent in charge, Michael Henry, stepped in and continues to fill in admirably as acting NED DSAC. That's all I have. If anyone has any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Caleb. Let me see on my list here. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll call on you. Is there anyone from the public with any questions? Okay, seeing none. The one thing that was interesting was that mitten crab that you mentioned. We've had issues in Chesapeake Bay with that. Did you say it went to they were captured in, where were they confiscated? I thought you said Detroit.
I'd have to look it up for you, Mr. Chairman. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
I can provide more details. I should be able to provide more details on that. But can I get back to you by email?
Listen, I don't want you to have to do a whole lot of extra work. I was just curious as to where they came in and where they were.
Sorry, I don't know
where
off
they
the
were
top
seized.
of my head.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. We've had issues in the past with mitten crabs in the bay, and I haven't heard of any mitten crab issues for some time now. But I appreciate the hard work and effort that you guys do to keep those types of critters from entering our system. So thank you very much.
That was just actually a container seizure. So that was just a JFK. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, okay, I got you. All right, very good. I don't see any hands, Caleb, at this time. So thanks for your report, and look forward to talking with you at the next meeting.
Sounds good.
All right, I'm going to move on to our last report under organization reports. Lieutenant Weems, I believe I saw your name on here earlier for the Coast Guard report. If you're ready, you got the floor.
Can you hear me all right? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sound great. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone. This is the 5th Coast Guard District Enforcement Report from February 1st until March 31st. To start, we've totaled 59 LMR boardings and assisted or involved in 3 marine protected species incidents or events. The 59 boardings, a little bit lower than last year, but on par with our fiscal year 21 projections. And for the total of fiscal year 21, currently we're at 201 boardings with 24 LMR violations, violation rate of 11.9%. No violations to report from these past 2 months of operations. However, we do have a few marine protected species events that we were involved in. One at the end of February. This was a pretty good case that was worked between Coast Guard, NOAA, and then a local stranding network. I think this developed on a Saturday evening or night. We had a conference call with everyone, our bosses at Atlantic area, as well as the 5th District, NOAA, and the local stranding network. We received a report of a entangled and deceased whale that was just south of our AOR. I believe it was just off of Myrtle Beach. And we were able to coordinate one of our Coast Guard cutters that was based out of North Carolina to pick up local stranding network members from North Carolina, and then they took them down on scene, where they were able to evaluate, document, and tag the deceased whale, and we were able to return them back to shore, and NOAA and the local stranding network basically took it from there. So that was a good one that we worked in the end of February. We had another case in mid-March, not really a case, but one of our Coast Guard cutters that was also based out of North Carolina, a different one. They worked with the North Carolina Sea Turtle Project, and they've actually been working with them since January, I believe. So this recent one, they released 12 sea turtles back to sea in conjunction with the Sea Turtle Project down there. But in total for this calendar year, I believe they're at 41 now. And then the most recent case, this was more of just a sighting for us, one of our Coast Guard aircraft. It was at the end of March, on March 30th, the Coast Guard aircraft had reported a deceased humpback whale. It was in the vicinity of Oregon Inlet in Sector, North Carolina. We informed the local NOAA reps, but there was no additional Coast Guard assistance required at that time. A few commercial fishing vessel safety efforts. So we've had 52 safety examinations, 45 decals issued, 45 at-sea boardings, 16 resulting in a safety violation, 2 safety terminations, and then 2 casualties as well. The 2 casualties I have listed lower in the report. So it was the fishing vessel Captain John had lost propulsion while they were operating 65 nautical miles east of Cape Charles, Virginia, and one of our 87-foot patrol boats, Coast Guard cutter Shearwater, was able to tow the vessel back to Cape May, New Jersey without further incident. And in around the same time, about 2 days later, we had the fishing vessel Swaggy B lost steering when their generators went down, and they were operating about 100 nautical miles east of Manasquan, New Jersey. And Good Samaritan fishing vessel Lily Rose was able to tow the vessel safely back to Manasquan, New Jersey for no further incident. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate forum or audience, but we've also had some recent IUU operations. Would you all like to hear about that, or is it not the appropriate forum?
I think that's fine to present to the council.
Okay, so it wasn't in the report, but this all developed somewhat recently towards the end of March, and then honestly just last week from the first week in April. But so we've been working with our intelligence department as well as ICAT and NOAA, and we are trying to narrow down to when we're seeing foreign fishing vessel activity near our EEZ. We haven't had any EEZ incursions, but we've seen a fleet of foreign fishing vessels that are just between our EEZ and the Bermudan EEZ. And in the beginning of March, they were just east of Bermuda, but then towards mid to late March, they started to move west, and then that's when they were in between both of our EEZs. So we were able to coordinate some Coast Guard assets and send them out there. Coast Guard's stance right now is just, what is it called, maritime domain awareness. So we're just documenting, conducting ROA, so just questioning, seeing what they're fishing for, getting their permits and everything through ICAT, and just verifying, taking photographs, and then reporting back to our intelligence department, and then routing that stuff up through NOAA as well as ICAT for awareness and for visibility. We had actually recently worked with the government of Taiwan because a few were Taiwan flagged vessels, and it didn't result in any boarding, but we were able to document, and we reached back out to them because initially through ICAT, we saw that they were catching tuna, but the initial ICAT permit that we received for the vessel said that they weren't permitted to catch specific tuna. But after we worked out the conflict with the government of Taiwan, and we were able to receive an updated permit for them that actually said that they were permitted to fish for that specific species. So it got a lot of visibility in the Coast Guard, and I'm not quite sure how it went through NOAA or through ICAT's efforts, but it was a good effort from Coast Guard stance in exercising the motor process for us and working with the government of Taiwan, and just let them know that, hey, we are out there, we are looking, obviously no EEZ incursions, so there wasn't much we can do outside of, just working through their government, and we're almost at their mercy after that. But it was good efforts by all, and we'll continue to look out there and monitor that, because we see a trend in the February to May timeframe of foreign fishing vessels that come near our EEZ. I want to say the closest they got were 20 to 30 nautical miles just outside of our EEZ that are fishing, high-seas fishing. So we're continuing to track that, and I think from what we've seen recently, they're starting to move southeast and away from our EEZ now. Usually around April 15th is when they start to head out of the area, but they may push down to our district just south of us in District 7. So, but we'll continue to monitor, and that's all I have for the IUU and Coast Guard update. Pending any questions.
Okay, Devontae, thank you very much. Yeah, I see a couple hands for questions. I do want to say that, so this year, the Striped Bass Winter Tagging Cruise Survey was operating out of Ocean City, Maryland. And given that it was out of Ocean City, I was able to go out a couple times on the survey. And it was good to see you guys, because we were about 12 to 15 miles offshore, catching, we caught probably 100 fish, but your guys rolled up kind of close to us, and I think they communicated with the captain knowing that it was research. But it was good to see the activity out there, because I know that that's been an issue in the past on stripers. Not that that's an issue for the council, but I'm sure that folks on the call today would like to know that you guys are out there keeping an eye on things. So I appreciate it. Let's see if we have any questions for you. I have two hands. Let's start with Tony Delernia, and then I'll go to Dewey next. Go ahead, Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lieutenant, this recent high seas activity that you were just reporting between our EEZ and Bermuda, is that activity recent in the past few years? You said you've been detecting it. It's been detected recently, and the reason I ask is because the South Atlantic Council is currently involved in a deep discussion on what is causing the depletion of mature mahi or dolphin fish in their region and in their area, and there seems to be those that seem to be to think that it may be domestic longline gear that's doing it. But upon further discussion, it appears to me that there may be some high seas fishing activity that's really causing the depletion rather than the domestic longline fleet. I was wondering if you could, number one, I think I heard you say that they were tuna fishers. So I suspect it would be longline gear that they were using. And two, can you tell me how recently has this activity been detected? Because I'm wondering if it's coincidental that this increase in activity is coincidental with the decrease of the adult mahi-mahi. So it's a little bit complicated question. I'm not sure for how far you can go into it, but thank you. I'll mute myself. Go ahead.
All right, yeah. So first, it was definitely long line vessels, and I will double check with Intel, but I may be able to share some of the photographs that our vessels took of the foreign fishing vessels. And then second, so the only reason actually that we found this trend was from, we have an Intel staff member who used to work in our Pacific Area Command out west, and it was a lot more prevalent over there. But in 2019, we looked from December until the June-July timeframe to see if we saw any foreign fishing vessel activity just beyond our EEZ or in between Bermuda EEZ. And we noticed there was, working with our Intel staff, there was a few, I think maybe 5 or 6 foreign fishing vessels that were out there. And judging by last year's trend in 2020, as well as this year so far, it looks like they follow the same trend where the bulk of the time that they push towards our EEZ is from that February to April, May timeframe, and they are actively fishing like in that area between our EEZs. Now, as far as them pushing, like when they push further south, I know some of the vessels that we were tracking this time, I mean, they go all the way down to Trinidad and Tobago. Sorry about that. They go all the way down to Trinidad and Tobago and back up. And they are just bouncing back and forth from our EEZ down south and then maybe back to their host country eventually. But we've seen this since 2019, and it was because the admiral at the time for the 5th District, he wanted to push the new FRCs, the new assets that we had out there to see, you know, what do we have out there? Is there anyone out there? Do we have people fishing that far out beyond our EEZ? And that's what we found. So it was, honestly, it was by chance in 2019. And since then, we're making this a routine thing around the same time of year to push assets out there, because that's what we're seeing in the trend as far as those vessels, the foreign fishing vessels being just beyond our EEZ. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Lieutenant. I would suggest that you share that information with your counterpart, who's a liaison to the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council, because I suspect this issue will be revisited by that council. And I think it'd be good if he was prepped and ready to answer some of those questions, because it appears that we may be focusing on the wrong fleet when it comes to the depletion of mahi-mahi. Thank you, sir. I'll mute myself.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
All right, thanks, Tony. Thanks, Lieutenant, for your answer. I've got Dewey Himmelwright next. Go ahead, Dewey.
Yeah, thank you there. Did you say there was no boardings?
There were no LMR. You mean of the IUU fisheries, or do you mean domestically?
No, the IUU fishing boats. There was no boardings?
Yeah, so we looked to do a boarding of one of them because we saw that they were clearly, we had photos of them catching tuna out there, and initially we thought that they weren't permitted for tuna from what we got from ICAP, but it was just a miscommunication. So we basically routed everything up through the State Department. The State Department worked with the government of Taiwan, and they said that no, this vessel is permitted, and they're allowed bycatch of this specific tuna. And then we also verified that again with ICAT. And that was our basis for trying to get on board, because we didn't have any jurisdiction. They weren't in our EEZ. They were still in the high seas. And because they were permitted for that, they didn't allow us. The government of Taiwan, it would have had to have been a flag state boarding with their consent, and they didn't give us their consent to conduct the boarding. So that's why we ended up not getting on. We just conducted questions and documented everything.
So my next question would be, how do you know they were only catching tuna? Was there like following them for days, watching them? I'm just curious, what else did they have on board? Shark fins, marlins, or anything like that? I was just curious of you know, the unknowns. It seems like is a wide variety there. I was just curious about that. Thank you.
And that was one of our biggest things as well, is because they mentioned that they had at least 20 tunas on board, but they didn't mention any other catch. This was just through the questioning. And we wanted to get on board to actually see what they had on board. But in order to do that, we would have had to have gotten Taiwan's consent to do so. And we didn't get that consent, unfortunately. But that was a big thing from the Intel department. It's like, if we can get on board there, at least just look and see, you know, what they're catching, because they are pretty close to the EEZ. I mean, they're smart. They know what they're doing. They know where they can and can't fish, and they also know what they can and can't get away with. So it was a big push for us. Unfortunately, it didn't go through, but I think that us going through this process, because this was the very first time that we've gone through this process. I mean, at least unless it was back in the 90s or before. I mean, recently from what we've heard from everyone as we went through it. But I think the fact that we already started this process and we have some documentation on it now, and it's become a bigger issue and it's all the way up to like our headquarters level and everyone's aware, I think we'll be able to get more traction. And once we nail down the process and know what the State Department needs to go to these governments to say like, hey, this is what we see. I understand they're permanent for this, but this is what we see that they have in the water or what they're catching, and then hopefully try to use that to get on board these vessels.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I hope there's something come to fruition where it's actually done, where there can be ICAP boardings, because to date it's pretty useless. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks for that question and answer. Does anyone else from the council have any questions for the lieutenant? David Stormer, I see your hand. Go ahead, David.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Thanks for that update. I was wondering, and you might have answered this, what species of whale was entangled and deceased there off of Myrtle Beach?
I believe it was a right whale, but I can double check that right now. If you give me maybe 60 seconds.
Okay, great, thanks. And you might have mentioned this too, but do you know what species of tuna was being fished in the international waters there that was permitted by Taiwan?
So the images that we had, it was believed that I believe it was. I thought they said it was yellowfin. I can double check that and then also get back to you. I have this right here in my email. I just have to dig through and find the images.
No worries. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, Devontae, if you don't worry about looking that up right now. Maybe you can send it to Chris if you can go through your email when you have time, and just put some answers to those questions together and send them to Chris, and then he can send them out to council. So I don't want you to have to. It's hard to do two things. I don't want you to have to struggle to try to pull up that information on call. But thanks for your question, David. Appreciate that. I don't see any more hands at this time. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to ask any questions of Lieutenant? Okay, seeing none. Devontae, thanks for your presentation. And we're going to move on to our liaison reports. We're a little bit over our time limits. I know we're moving in after 1 o'clock. But I just want, instead of taking a break, I just think we need to let's just try to wrap this up with our liaison reports. And we're going to start with New England. And I'm going to turn to Peter Hughes for that report. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can start the stopwatch. There has not been a New England Fisheries Management Council since our last Mid-Atlantic Council. That meeting will take place next week, and that concludes my liaison report. Thank you.
That was one of the best reports you've ever given, Peter. No, I realized that New England was next week, so we'll look forward to hearing from you at our next meeting regarding the actions that are being taken up next week in New England. And thank you, as I always mention, thank you for your willingness to serve in that liaison role. Eric Reed, as the New England Vice Chair, did you have anything you wanted to add before I move on to South Atlantic?
No, that was an extremely thorough report. So thank
you. Excellent. Okay, perfect. All right, we're going to go down to the South Atlantic now. I've got Dewey and Tony. I don't know if whoever wants to go, that'd be great.
I'm good to go, Mike, if you're good with it. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Tony.
All right. South Atlantic met for during the week of March 1st. First thing they did was they chose some preferred management measures for the dolphin and wahoo fishery. They were considering reducing the current recreational vessel limit for dolphin, or mahis as we call them further up north here, from 60 fish to 48 fish per vessel, while maintaining the 10 fish per person daily bag limit. And they also would reduce the wahoo possession limit from 2 fish to 1 fish. There continues to be some regional differences in the dolphin and wahoo fisheries and that became the focus of discussions as members of the council reviewed concerns expressed during the public hearings held in late January. And I alluded to that a few minutes ago in my question to the Coast Guard. Seems that fishermen in South Florida and the Keys, including the charter captains, have expressed concerns about catching fewer mahis or dolphin and encountering smaller fish over the past few years, and have requested the council take action to reduce the harvest. Further north, charter captains and other fishermen have raised objections to the proposed reductions, noting that the importance of maintaining higher vessel limits for trips that require much further runs further offshore. And then again, there was a little bit of a discussion of, well, is it a shift in distribution? Is there an international effort that's occurring that's causing that depletion? And that's unresolved. But it was, I found it interesting to hear the Coast Guard report just now, also focusing on what some have suggested has been an international effort, or an effort in international waters to reduce the availability of mahis to U.S. waters. Also to this amendment to this plan, it also includes updates to annual catch limits, modifications to sector allocations, and changes to accountability measures designed to ensure catch levels are not exceeded for both dolphin and wahoo. Of an interest also to our mid-Atlantic fishermen would be proposed management measures would also allow properly permitted commercial fishing vessels with trap, pot, and buoy gear on board to retain up to 500 pounds gutted weight of dolphin. That's important for many of our mid-Atlantic and southern New England vessels, because lobster boats very often, when they go up to pull their gear, they may find a lot of mahis around their buoys, and they want to be able to fish them and bring them home to market to their income. And up until now, that's been prohibited, but it looks like they're going to create an exemption for those basically will be our lobster boats and our black sea bass boats that are using fishing pot gear. So that's a good plus for us. Let's see. All right. Also, after considering a recommendation from its law enforcement group, the council removed an action that would have allowed the filleting of dolphin or mahis at sea. That was something that we had asked as a result of our law enforcement workshop that we conducted a couple of years ago. Originally, the council had approved to let that go forward, but there was strong opposition from the law enforcement arm of the South Atlantic Council regarding that exemption. The feeling of the Southeast law enforcement group was that, well, once you allow it for the Mid-Atlantic vessels, then the South Atlantic vessels are going to come and ask for it also, and we don't want to give it to the South Atlantic vessels. And so as a result, we got caught up in that buzzsaw, and they reversed their decision, and so our request to allow the filleting of mahis at sea has now, it's not going anywhere. Let's see, red snapper. NOAA Fisheries provided an update on the recreational red snapper season for 21. And due to delay from COVID, some landings data from 2020 are not still yet available. Last year, the number of fishing days determined by NOAA Fisheries based on catch estimates from the previous year was only about 5 or 6 days. And so we're not sure where that's going to happen, where we're going to go with that red snapper fishery in this coming year. I would just, as an aside, mention that our black sea bass fishery appears to be approaching a condition of the red snapper fishery in the South Atlantic. And it would be tragic that as the black sea bass stock continues to grow, we end up reducing the number of days that fishermen can fish for black sea bass. Let's see. King Mackerel, Red Porgy, Snowy Group. The council continued work on management measures addressing Atlantic Migratory Group of King Mackerel based on recent stock assessments. And well, I'll stop there if there are any questions. I know I'm running on and on. Maybe Dewey might have something. I'm not sure if the South Atlantic Liaison, I'm not sure. I'm looking for the name. I'm not sure if there's someone here today from the South Atlantic. But I'll take questions at this point. I see I'm also getting text messages. So I'll hold back right now, see if there's any other questions.
All right, Tony.
And also, Dewey, I see Dewey's hands up.
Yeah, let me go to Dewey to see if he has anything to add, and then I'm looking through the names as well to see who might be here from the South Atlantic, if there is someone on from the South Atlantic. So let's go to Dewey. Go ahead, Dewey, if you have something you want to add.
To asking for that exemption for the Mid-Atlantic, we were basically asking for the Bahamian exemption, which allows people to go to the Bahamas, fish, and come back with their fillets, with their skin on, and stuff like that. So basically, we were asking for an exemption, which was already granted to U.S. Fishermen that go to the Bahamas. But it appeared like not only law enforcement, but some other council members had wished they hadn't done that or something. So that's why, we were, I guess, it was shot down. But that we were asking for the same exemption. So it's kind of, I wish we could have got that. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dewey. Looking through the list of names, there are a few people whose names I do not recognize. Is there a South Atlantic Council liaison that would like to offer anything on the call at this time? I don't know everybody on the South Atlantic Council. I haven't.
Yeah, Mike, I don't think there is nobody on here.
Yeah. I don't see anybody either, Mike. No.
Okay. Yeah, there's a few people whose names I think they're just folks from the public that I don't recognize. But okay. Well, I thought I'd ask to give everybody an opportunity to present anything they have. Are there any questions for Tony and Dewey at this time from the council? All right, I don't see any hands. Anyone from the public want to ask any questions of our liaisons to the South Atlantic? Okay, I don't see any hands. Tony, thank you. And Dewey, thank you for your report. And thank you for your continued work with our colleagues in the South Atlantic. That concludes our liaison reports at this time. So we're going to move into continuing and new business. Is there any continuing and new business to come before the council at this time? Okay, I don't see any hands coming up on my screen. So that concludes our April 2021 council meeting. I want to thank everybody, including staff, for all their hard work and effort in working through this meeting for the last 3 days. It was great to hear everyone's voice, and Chris and Wes and I will be talking about how to proceed for June and August, whether we, as we discussed earlier. So stay tuned for a note from us, or a note from Chris on that. We'll have to plan a call to see how things go, but I hope everybody can stay safe and over the next few months. And I'm really looking forward to getting back together in a room together with everyone. This is a challenge for any of you who have had to organize and run meetings on a webinar. It can be a challenge. So take care, everyone, and I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and I'll look forward to talking with you all soon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everybody. Take care, everybody. Be safe.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll talk soon. All right.